I'll talk about social movements in the post-capitalist era, social movements after capitalism. This whole research project has an interesting genesis. I go to leftist Marxist conferences all the time. I come from a Marxian tradition in sociology. And if you go to Marxian conferences, every year you hear the same speech. An older white man gets up on stage and says, you know, it is the end of capitalism, the final crisis has come, the people are going to overthrow the governments of the world, and global socialism is just around the corner. And I kept thinking and saying, I would love the socialist revolution, but I don't see it. Right? Where is this end of capitalism? And so I sat down to write an article about, you know, capitalism is still alive and well, and, you know, I don't like that, but we all should accept that. And then I realized maybe it is the end of capitalism. Maybe if we think carefully about our categories and about the way our economy and our politics work, maybe they have a point. And so this lecture will be, ironically, about the end of capitalism and what is happening now that capitalism has already ended. Let me ask you a simple question. If an indigenous leader in the Peruvian Amazon wants to improve conditions for her people, secure their rights to their land, prevent mining companies from destroying their rivers, where does she go? She goes to the United States Congress to ask the United States Congress to intervene in Peru to ensure the rights of her indigenous people. And that's not just one incident. We could come up with dozens of anecdotes like this. No systematic data, nothing I can put in a regression model, but a lot of anecdotes of people around the world turning not to their own governments, but to the US government when they want redress. And I would like to suggest that political scientists divide the world into countries that have sovereignty, and every country has sovereignty. Maybe in the European Union you have a new arrangement of shared sovereignty between Brussels and Vienna. But formally speaking, every country is sovereign, can set its own laws. But I would like to problematize sovereignty, to ask, what is the effective sovereignty of each country? But in Europe, that cession of sovereignty has been voluntary through treaties. In much of the rest of the world, it's not been a voluntary democratic ceding of sovereignty. In most of the world, decisions that affect people's everyday lives are made in Washington or New York or London, and those decisions determine your life chances as a person in Uganda or Thailand or the Middle East. The only country in the world that is not subject, arguably, is not subject to any real limits on effective sovereignty is the United States. So I suggest this is a macro reality that we should incorporate into our view of the world. And I'm going to incorporate that tonight. I'm going to go through 4 stages of incorporating this view of the world into thinking about society. First, I'll simply explain the concept, what I mean by American world empire. Then I'll explain why that means the end of capitalism, why I say tonight that we no longer live in a capitalist world. I'll talk about post-capitalism, which has not led to revolution. In fact, it's led to a situation where we live in an empire, but maybe not such a terrible empire as it could be. And then I'll finally address the implications for social movements, what this means for people who want to change the world. My own intellectual tradition is called world systems analysis. I come from, it's a school of macro sociology. Emanuel Wallerstein is a very famous sociologist who's very well recognized as the originator of world systems analysis. The basic idea of world systems analysis grew out of the 1960s milieu of sociology. In the 1960s, sociologists were writing about social systems theory. In the United States, there was a real effort to be social physicists, to create a new social science as opposed to a sociology as a humanities. Many people converged on three basic types of systems in society: cultural systems, economic systems, and political systems. The fundamental insight of world systems analysis was to recognize that these systems don't coexist equally, but rather that at different points in history, different systems dominate. In the modern world, not just in the modern world, in the historical world, really we only have systems where the economy is larger than any one polity. So multiple countries or multiple city-states exist within a larger trading economy, or systems in which there's one polity, one political organization that endogenizes the economy. That is, the entire economy exists within one political system. And Wallerstein called these systems world economies and world empires. In the modern world, we clearly live in a world economy that is, we have clearly lived in a world economy. The economy has been bigger than the power of any one country to control it. And Wallerstein calls this capitalism. He equates this with capitalism. That is, Wallerstein says that you can only have capitalism when the economy cannot be endogenized, when the economy cannot be brought under the control of a single political entity. And for convenience sake, we can say that started in 1492. But I'm suggesting that we are now moving, or have already started to move, from a world economy into a world empire. And I want to frame this in terms of two questions. Who oppresses? Under capitalism, in a world economy, the capitalists oppress. Those who control the means of production oppress those who have nothing to sell but their labor. Bourgeoisie and proletariat, classical Marxism. How do they oppress? They oppress through unequal exchange in politically structured markets. Oh, in a world empire, the equation is different. Who oppresses? Not those with capital, those with power, those with political influence. And how do they oppress? They oppress through political mechanisms, not through the open market. I ask you, again, a simple thought experiment. Would any of you trade your position as a middle-class Austrian, or European, or whatever you're from, would any of you trade your position in order to be a factory-owning capitalist in Bangladesh? I mean, how many of you would want the life of a Bangladeshi factory owner? I suspect nobody. Because this is not the heart of the world economy anymore. Right? Workers are not oppressed by their factory owners in their factories. I mean, it happens. But that's not where the real money is made in the world economy. Let me ask you, what are the leading industries, what are the profitable industries? Where is the peak of the global economy today? Banking, entertainment, oil and gas, telecommunications, weapons manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, the internet, the Googles of the world, the Citibanks of the world, the Goldman Sachses of the world, the Disneys of the world, the Mercks of the world. These companies are not making money by oppressing factory workers. These companies are making money through their intellectual property, by a government intervening to give these companies profits. So I submit that we now live not in a politically structured economy. We live in an economically structured polity. That is, the market has been endogenized. At the top levels of profit in the world economy, the market is under control. It's not a free and open market. Can we then call that a world empire? I mean, world empire is a loaded term. Wallerstein did not say world polity, he said world empire. That gives me ideas of, you know, an emperor, of people ruling over other people. Is that what happens in a world polity? Let me give you the facts. Everyone says the US is in decline. The US still accounts for over 20% of total world GDP. Throw in the English-speaking countries. So let's think of empire not as just the United States, but as a coordinated group of polities that together control the world. English-speaking countries are up to 30%. There are 5 countries in the world, in the developed world, that have growing populations. United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom. The 5 Anglo-Saxon countries. Even Ireland, which is excluded from the Anglo-Saxon club, also has a declining population. Right? It's the 5 countries that cooperate in very close political unison on every issue that are the ones that have growing economies, growing populations, and attract all of the rich and skilled people from around the world. I'll quote Max Weber here, and forgive me, I don't speak German. I'll quote him in English, in Talcott Parsons' translation. A state is a human community that successfully claims the monopoly of legitimate, I emphasize, legitimate use of physical force within a given territory. When Russia invades Crimea, it is by definition illegitimate. Only Russians think it was legitimate for Russia to invade Crimea. The US may not have a monopoly on the use of force, but the US has a monopoly on the legitimate use of force in the entire world. You may not agree with the use of US power. I don't agree with the use of US power. But I recognize the reality of it, that the US intervenes pretty much on an annual basis in some country somewhere in the world. And that decision to intervene is broadly accepted by the entire international community. Okay. What do we have today? We have an American world empire that is a heterogeneous polity. The US does not rule the world from Washington. Instead, there are layers of shared sovereignty. Britain has some say in American politics. Australia has some say in American politics. Not much, but some. Europeans much, much less. Right? There is a shared sovereignty of the 5 English-speaking countries. And there are countries like China, Brazil, that have some autonomy in the world. Certainly Germany, the European Union in general, that have some autonomy but broadly acquiesce in US power. Does that mean the end of capitalism? It depends how you define capitalism. There are as many definitions of capitalism as there are academics defining capitalism. But if what we mean by capitalism is the usual Marxian definition, I think it's the end. Let me point out a few things. Extraordinary rewards today are not made by capitalists. I mean, who's a capitalist? How many of you have a pension, shares in a retirement fund of some kind? Any kind of financial investment? I have a retirement fund in Australia. I'm the capitalist. And I'm the one being taken advantage of by the CEO. Right? It's the managers who are making huge salaries, not the capitalists who are making huge returns. I mean, I own ExxonMobil, but I don't run ExxonMobil. It's the people who run it who are making enormous amounts of money. In the financial world, banks are no longer very profitable. It's hedge funds. That is, it's organizations that work outside of regulated market mechanisms, not organizations that are competing to make loans in markets. I mean, banks make money, but hedge funds make much, much more money. You make money in the world by having intellectual property and killing your competitors, politically killing them, closing them off. It's not the innovators who make money. It's the people with political control who make money. That's the end of capitalism. I think it is also, in a way, in a very real way, the end of democracy. And it's the end of democracy because it changes the winning strategy in politics. Previously, the winning strategy was mass mobilization of voters. I don't know the Austrian system. Certainly in the UK, the Labour Party and the Tory Party used to have millions of members. Right? They had to have millions of members to win elections. Now, very few people bother becoming members of political parties. Right? Mass mobilization for politics is over. Instead, the way to get things done is elite persuasion. Polanyi said that when the market takes over, when the market pushes too far, society will push back and re-embed the market. So Polanyi said in the 19th century, when capitalism pushed too far, we had labor unions and worker revolts that forced society to take back control of the labor relationship. Well, the Polanyian re-embedding, this double movement it's called, of the market expands and then people push back. This double movement is no longer useful because society has re-embedded the market, but it hasn't embedded it in a democratic political system. It's embedded it in a world empire. My colleague at the University of Sydney, John Keane, political scientist, has a big theory about democracy and the change in democracy in the 21st century. He says that representative democracy is over. So the era of big mass parties competing to get members, people politically active in local clubs and local discussions, that era of politics is over, and instead we have a new era of democracy, monitory democracy. You rely on bloggers, newspaper reporters, NGOs, think tanks, official reports. You rely on other people to monitor government for you. Keane calls it a post-Westminster form of democracy. That is, democracy is not what's happening in Parliament, in which power monitoring and power controlling devices have begun to extend sideways and downward through the whole political order. Right, so what matters is getting all of the monitors to agree. All the NGOs and think tanks and pressure groups and labor unions, they're the people you have to convince, not voters. I say no, we don't have monitory democracy. We actually have a monitory empire. And using Keane's language, I would say this is a post-democratic form of governance, in which power monitoring and power controlling devices have begun to extend sideways and downwards through the whole political order. US empire is not Darth Vader ruling over everybody. US empire is a whole bunch of pressure groups. Labor unions, think tanks, business organizations, attempting to influence imperial politics. To the extent that a country's effective sovereignty rests in places like Washington, New York, and London, its people's life opportunities are partially determined locally and partially determined in the imperial center. So if you think about the decisions that affect you, who decided that a certain video on YouTube can only be shown in a certain territory and you can't watch it in Austria? The things that affect your daily life, some of those decisions are made in Graz, some of those decisions are made in Styria, some of those decisions are made in Austria, some of those decisions are made in Brussels, and some of those decisions are made, quite frankly, in Washington. And that's true for everybody. We have limited local self-governance within a global world empire. So I'm going to contrast two eras. what I would call the capitalist era, 1492, or we can argue about the date until 2001. And for convenience, I'll use September 11th, 2001 as the inflection point toward a new world empire. The problem facing social movements, the problem facing good people, like I'm sure all of you are good people who want positive social change. Your problem was your particular state, even if it's democratic, cannot always make life better because there are market realities that prevent it. The problem facing positive social change is that power does not rest here, but rests in the imperial center. Finally, what is the strategy for success? In the capitalist era, successful social movements mobilize large populations. In the imperial era, social movements mobilize celebrities. We've entered a period of post-politics. And I think the ultimate symbol of that is anonymous. I think most ordinary people have come to the resignation that they're not going to win. Right? The purpose of organizing is the politics of resistance, to protest for the sake of protesting. Surveys repeatedly show that people, and especially young people, in today's developed democracies, no longer believe in democratic politics. The surveys are overwhelming on this, that all across the developed world, young people say, politics don't matter, politicians are all corrupt and liars, nobody is going to take the public opinion seriously. And I think they're right. I think they intuitively recognize what I am presenting to you as an academic theory, that the key policies that affect them, that they care about, are not made in their own national capitals. I'm sorry to end on such a depressing note, but that is how I see reality. My real purpose for giving lectures like this is not to depress everybody. My real purpose is to encourage social scientists to study the world as it exists today in the hope of trying to find a better way, instead of studying the world that existed yesterday or the world that they wished exists but doesn't.